This episode deep dives into an area that is sometimes difficult to talk about. So, we want to provide a trigger warning because what we will be talking about is human trafficking. If you yourself is a victim or may suspect that someone is a victim of human trafficking, you can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 1-888 373 7888. Once again, that is 1-888 373 7888. Our goal here is to always create a community where you are seen and you are safe and empowered.
All the memories from those years
Yeah.
just started like flooding my mind, and I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe
Yeah.
it. And I have to say there was a lot of shame,
Mm.
that was tied to what had happened so early on. But what I learned from a child who had unresolved trauma is that when bad things happen, you just bury it down
Mm.
and just forget about it and move on.
Yeah.
I couldn't see myself as a victim. I wasn't in therapy. Therapy wasn't a thing like that back then.
Welcome back to Musings of a Geriatric Mama. I'm your host, Kedna Amey, and I'm so glad that you are here because today's conversation is going to be so impactful. We are going to be talking about beauty, body positivity, and advocacy with our special guest, Sabine Dieme-Erlich. Sabine is a trauma-informed strategist, speaker, and advocate dedicated to helping creatives build safe and purposeful careers in the entertainment industry. A former law enforcement officer and crisis counselor turned founder of Lights Camera Action for Change. She leads a trauma informed career readiness platform equipping aspiring entertainers with the tools to navigate the industry with confidence and care without compromise. Certified to facilitate the nationally recognized Ending the Game intervention curriculum and a survivor advocate of exploitation, Sabine combines her own lived experience as a former entertainment hopeful with professional expertise in crisis intervention, mentoring, and more. Through this unique lens, she bridges critical gaps in support for creatives seeking both protection and purpose. With 18 years in public service, including the past 7 years as a senior staff analyst specializing in data analytics and strategic negotiations, Sabine brings both heart and business acumen to her mission of empowering individuals to reclaim resilience, purpose, and power. Her voice and mission have inspired many, and I know her story will leave you encouraged and empowered. Welcome, Sabine.
Woo!
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here. How are you?
I am doing so good. I'm so happy to be in this space. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I am so glad that you said yes. I know you're a busy mom, entrepreneur, and making impact daily. So I'm glad that we're going to have this conversation in order to empower our audience about what it means to shed a little bit of light on an industry that we don't always have access to, nor do we always understand the inner workings and how women are impacted daily, sometimes exploited and taken advantage of. And through what you're doing, you're giving women a voice. And I just want to make sure that we recognize the hard work that you're doing. And thank you so much for what you're doing because we're going to be able, hopefully, to prevent this cycle of exploitation, this cycle of causing harm to women. We can put an end to it. So, but before we deep dive into that, I want to talk a little bit more about who Sabine was before motherhood and all this advocacy work that you have been doing. Who was this girl? What was she like? What
Yes.
motivated her? And how did we get here?
Yeah, so Sabine, my goodness, she was a creative, with ambitions from a very young age. I remember, just always being someone who loved fashion, who loved, while I was very much a shy little girl, if I had the opportunity to be in the spotlight, I would just beam. So I always sort of had that zeal and that thirst for creativity, that thirst really just to find different ways to express myself. And I was able to do that with music, with drawing as well. At point during my childhood, I started a fashion line on paper, but it was very much,
It's
it was
same,
business.
same.
Let me tell you, and I did it for years where I had like all of my editions, fall, summer,
Love
all
that.
the things.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so
Yes.
much so that my brothers and I and neighborhood friends would have board meetings. Like, this is how serious I was.
Oh.
And yes, and my company was Black and Beauty. I just, thinking back about that, it just makes me, it's a fond memory of like where the creativity first began. So,
I love that. I have a similar story, and I realized that ambitious, creative women, we have an origin story that starts with a pen and a pad, a sketch pad.
mhm,
Same thing. I created my own fashion line. I was about 11 or 12 years old, and I had all the, everything sketched out, all the like you said, the additions, and it's just it was a way for us to have an outlet to express
mhm,
ourselves. And I think that's so important for young women as we're in our formative years to have an outlet where we can create and be seen and be heard. And I think as we progress in our adulthood, we see how important that is.
oh
To
yeah.
have a place where we can be creative, and it's just amazing. And one day, hey, let's really dream it out and live it out, and let's
Yes,
do those fashion lines one day. We still have time.
do. We definitely do.
We still have time. So, yes. So, you've always been passionate, you've always been creative. So, now I kind of want to know how law enforcement played a role in that. Because
Honey.
I realize that sometimes culturally or societally, creativity may not be
Yes.
what is highly regarded, or seems to be the
Mhm.
traditional way to have a career, to make impact. So we may do things that seem to be more accepted.
Right.
Like I used to paint, I used to sketch. Maybe I could have been a fashion designer, but I end up being a nurse because that's the proper Caribbean girl thing to do.
And I
But
can relate.
yes, exactly. But the thing is, when we're creatives, it's always going to show itself. So,
Mhm.
but now I'm curious to see, how did you end up in law enforcement?
You know what? Law enforcement wasn't a safe route, no more than creative fields were. But
Mm,
what I think happened is I went to high school. My particular high school, Turner Tech, it was one of those schools where it was considered a magnet school, but they had programs where by the time you graduated high school, you would have some sort of certificate. You can go straight into the workforce or have college credits. And so
yeah,
my parents, being of Haitian Caribbean background, they
same.
too pushed me to become a nurse. And I was adamant I was not going to become a nurse, right? Now, I did like the medical field, but I didn't want to be a nurse, right? So, and they were definitely not for the creative careers. And so I ended up doing the
Mm,
medical assistant program and then started
okay.
college, took nursing classes, and I really didn't like it, right? And then so
Yeah.
about like 20 years old, 2021, someone approached me and said, hey, the local government is hiring right now. And, it wasn't even in the cards, right? But I applied. I said, hey, gainful employment while I'm in college. And once I started at the police department, within a year, I found myself going into the police academy. Now, when I first got there, everyone said young people that come here, they always end up going into police. And I was like, well, you know what? I don't like nursing, right? I already don't like nursing. So I ended up switching my to criminal justice. That was short lived, but
Mm,
I did do that. And then I became an officer shortly after. And
wow.
it's so strange because, yeah, it's not a creative field. But what I will say is, as a child, I was a patrol. I don't know if you remember the patrol.
I do.
So I don't know. There's some, some traces there,
Foreshadowing.
I guess.
Yeah. um I love to hear that. Another thing that I realize about us as women is, and ambitious women, is how flexible we
Yeah.
realize we can be. And another thing that I realized after pivoting from something that was more traditional and back into the creative space is that life is a journey. You never
Mhm.
know where it will bring you, but everything in life has its purpose, and
Yes, it
it's
does.
building the woman that you're evolving to be. And it's so integral because your work in law enforcement is going to be a foundational piece to what you do in your own foundation and the work that you're doing for women. So everything is connected. Nothing
Right.
that we do is time
It's
lost,
wasted.
but it's
Yeah.
actually an integral part of our story and our journey. And before we deep dive a little more into that, and speaking of journey, tell us about your motherhood journey.
Mhm.
How did you know it was time? When did you become a mother? And what did it look like to transition from one thing to the next, especially being in a field that was so, you know, so many changes from day to day, or exposure to things
Right.
that could sometimes be dangerous? How does that
Yes.
look like?
So, wow, there were so many changes that led up to the point where my husband and I decided we were ready, for you to build our family. So, what happened is I became a mother at 36. Like the early 30s, I was transitioning out of law enforcement. And at the time, I wasn't happy about it because it didn't happen in the way that I would have expected. I always sort of
Mm,
knew I wasn't going to retire from law enforcement. I would say it all the time because I had aspirations at one point to even go to law school. And
okay,
so I always sort of felt like, this would be my foundation and then I would move on to something else.
got it.
And so I transitioned in the most unlikely ways, but it was again, God knows what he's doing. And it was time. It definitely was time, even though I didn't see it at the time. Right.
Right.
But so my current role as a senior staff analyst, I started that at 33. And then my husband and I got engaged that same year, got married the following year. And then I was pregnant with my son at 35 and had him at 36.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Amazing, amazing. Women are so dynamic. Like, there's so many layers to us. And another thing that I want to emphasize on this show and with our audience is that timing is never perfect. But what works best is what works best for your family, the right time for your
Mhm.
family. But as you said, God knows exactly what he's doing in it, and the journey into motherhood can happen sometimes planned, unplanned,
Yes.
but nonetheless, it's beautiful. And what I realized, Sabine, about you is how resilient you are. Going
Mhm.
through the unexpected pivots and turns and
Yeah.
still finding the beauty in that and creating the legacy that you are creating through your family and through your work. I want to talk
Mhm.
a little bit about before being in law enforcement and transitioning into your current role, because we're going to get into the conversation more about your advocacy work. What
Yes.
was it like in the entertainment world? Because a lot of people are curious, because that it's almost,
Yes.
I feel like sometimes the entertainment industry, of course, it consists of music, modeling, all the
Mhm.
different things. It could be gate kept, you know? So having your perspective as an ambitious woman pursuing that creative side, love to hear your input on it, especially with everything that's going on in society. We have
Mhm.
those, high profile cases of
Right.
entertainers that were caught in, a ring of exploitation of women and
Right.
potentially human trafficking. Like, tell us a little bit more about how you were able to navigate that space and how that eventually translated into the work that you do now with women and advocacy.
Yes. So going back to the creative aspect of, growing up being a creative, I always knew that regardless of the fact that I had the plan to go to college, I wanted to pursue, that desire of going into or creating a career in modeling as well as acting. And so I began taking classes, all while still going to college and going to auditions.
Mm,
So this is like between 18, 20 years old that I am really just exploring, really getting my feet wet, not really in the industry, but I'm around the perimeter checking out the scene, right? And so what I found is that at about a few years into doing that, right? I was in college again and met a man, who approached me and he, told me everything I probably wanted to hear at that time, right? I was,
right.
young, I was shy, I was very sheltered.
Mm,
And so he spoke to those needs, right? And told me that he was an industry insider. And you have to understand that
Mm,
back then, I'm talking like the early to mid 2000s, it was definitely more gate kept than it is now, because I think with the
okay,
advent of, the internet, and things are a bit more transparent than they were back then. The
understood.
most we had to like learn a little bit about the industry was like shows like Top Model and things like that, right?
Sure.
But so, he told me that he was an industry insider. I believed him
Mhm.
with the things that he showed me, the credentials and all of this, and even the access that he had to go to different events around town. And so I believed him, and I fell for those common pitfalls, right? Because from there, it became this thing of, okay, well, you want to become this model, you want to become this actress. Well, there's some things you have to do to get there. And
Mm,
so that was my first experience of exploitation.
mm,
Here's the thing about exploitation, and even if you want to take it a step further to like human trafficking, the thing that is so difficult, what I learned in law enforcement about not only recognizing it, but really being able to put it to an end, is that there's often so little awareness about it. And
mm.
those who are being exploited oftentimes cannot recognize
Don't realize
themselves
it.
as a victim. And
Mm,
the predators, they're never going to paint it as, oh, I'm taking advantage of you. If anything, they make it seem like you should be honored. You're fortunate that you have someone looking out for you in your career in this way. And of course, young impressionable women like I was at the time, you're going to eat it up because this is the closest you've ever been to this big shiny object, the entertainment industry that you want so badly. And so that's what my experience was. But I quickly learned, or I learned later on in law enforcement, what it really was. And, as I was going into, different cases, I started to see, oh my goodness, these women who reminded me of myself at that age. And so things just
wow.
became full circle. So that's what led me really into this work. And of course, as the stories started coming out, it pushed me to say, okay, the time is now to really start speaking up about my own experience, but personally, but even my professional experience and how the two ties together.
That is phenomenal to be able to get insight in hindsight, right? Almost about what you actually navigated when you were young and you were ambitious and you were looking to achieve a dream while someone was unfortunately taking advantage of how new you were or how maybe you weren't as fully informed of the ins and outs
Right.
of landing those roles or getting the parts and it's inspirational that the career that you had for so long became a backbone
Mhm.
to you understanding and now being able to explain that, give
Right.
people the insight so that they can identify whether or not they're in a safe situation and how to empower them to get themselves out of it or avoid it completely. So,
Right.
Sabine, wow, wow, wow. For those that are listening, some of the things we may discuss may strike a chord, but advocacy and speaking truth is what is going to help people be set free from some of the situations and the things that they're going through. So, Sabine, thank you again for just being vulnerable and open to talk about it. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the industry and body positivity because when you are going for these auditions, you have to have a sense of courage, a sense
Mhm.
of self worth and value to have the courage to do something that may be scary. So, can you talk about the mindset that you have to have when you're pursuing something that is in the beauty industry? And then we're going to talk a little bit more about the body image changes that happens with motherhood. But let's first talk about the confidence that you need to exude because a lot of women may not always feel confident. Like what does it take to
Mhm.
get the role? What does it take to try to get the part?
Yeah, so while I learned later on, right, that I was exploited, but I did still have some opportunities to do fashion shows and even to appear on television shows, right? Very small parts, but I got my my 15 minutes of fame, right?
Sure.
And what I learned in those experiences and even in hearing other people is that you really have to come in with a solid foundation, because I think what happened to me and what happens to so many others is we often go into those fields looking for those careers to build our confidence, those careers to build our self esteem, right? And so
Mm,
that's why we are so vulnerable when we go into those spaces,
mm,
because if that's what you're looking to build your confidence, then it's like when they swing the carrot in front of you, it's like you're going to do just about anything to
mm,
gain that. Some people think it's about the money, but I would argue that it's not about the money. I think many people who are going into the entertainment industry, if they don't have that solid foundation, it's really about being seen and being valued. Like that's what they're looking for. I know that me at that time, that's what I was looking for, because I wasn't the prettiest, I wasn't the smartest, right? Like, so you want to be seen, you want to be noticed and validated. And I was creative already. And so it was just natural for me to go in that direction. But I didn't realize the work that I should have done prior to that.
mm,
And so this is why, without going too deep into it, because I know you're going to touch on it later, but this is why in building the platform that I'm building now, it was important for me to include that it's not only a career readiness platform, but it's also trauma informed. Because again, people are coming into this looking for confidence, but what if, aside from looking for confidence, what if they have unresolved trauma
mm.
that they haven't identified or haven't worked through yet? And so this program, this platform gives them the opportunity to identify those things and at least start working on it as they're looking to enter the field.
I love that. Oh my gosh. There's so much to unpack there, but one of the things that I took away from what you said is that the inner work has to be solid before
Yeah.
the outer beauty really radiates. You
Mhm.
know, once we do the inner work, then that internal peace, confidence will show outward. It's important for us as women to feel valued first within ourselves, because once we know who we are, then the likelihood of someone taking advantage of us decreases.
Right.
That's one of the things that I heard from what you said. And it's just so important that we do the inner work, that we take the time, that we rest, we reset, and
Mhm.
really look inwardly before we continue to navigate spaces that can take a lot out of us emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And I love that you are building a space and a platform that looks at things from a multi-dimensional aspect. It's not just, well, these are the resources so that you can have a great career, but these are also the resources so that you can be receive the healing that you need, so that you can continue to maintain and sustain this career that you're in search
Right.
of. And Sabine, that's just amazing, amazing, amazing. Now, let's tie this into motherhood. Being
Yes.
in a creative space where your beauty is, you are beautiful and intelligent and all the
Thank
things. I heard you
you.
say that earlier, and I'm looking at her like, is she kidding? Like, you are just amazing inside and
Thank
out, Sabine. So
you.
I'm going to just put it out there. But tell me about how motherhood has impacted your sense of self, because our body changes so much after carrying
Mm.
children. And you had the honor of carrying two children.
Yes.
And one of the hardest things for women, especially after we've just have been so accustomed to
Mhm.
looking a certain way and feeling a certain way, and now we bring forth life, and that changes everything.
Yes.
How do you navigate embracing the new body you have, and how do you empower other women, especially as we talk a little bit more about your advocacy work, to do that too?
Yeah, so you know what's interesting? I spoke on a panel not long ago, and it was about beauty and style, how we maintain our beauty and style during motherhood. And I
Mm,
shared something that I don't think quite landed, so I'm gonna make sure I make sure it lands here. But
okay.
it's the fact that for me, because I was always that creative child, right? It took me going back to those roots, going back to that like starting point of just loving fashion, of just loving to find things that look good on me without
Mm,
even worrying about my body. Because when we were much
mm.
younger, what did we know about our butts and our this and our that? Like, we weren't focused on those things. Whatever we like to wear,
No.
or however we like to look, it was just because it brought us joy.
Mm.
For
Ooh,
me, it was like, okay, let's go back to those early stages where fashion was just fun. I'll tell you about a memory that
love
I
that.
have. So I'm an 80s baby, and I
Peace,
remember,
baby.
yes. And so I was, old enough to remember Hurricane Andrew. Remember Hurricane Andrew was such a big storm
I
in the early,
It was
and
in
so
South Florida.
yes, it was. And so I remember one day, the storm had already passed, but we had so much time where we were without power, and it was just
Mm-hmm.
a lot to recover from. And I remember my mother had told me, get dressed so we can go and get, supplies.
Supplies. Yep.
And I remember I just grabbed like the biggest flowy skirt that I could find. And while my mom is waiting for me, I'm in the mirror twirling. And then she tells me, "Girl, I'm waiting on you know how our parents can be." And
Yeah.
and she's like, "We're in the middle of a hurricane and here you are twirling in the mirror." But it was because it brought me joy. And so that's what it was for me. Like, I had to see, okay, yes, my body looks different. Yes, things don't fit the same way, but how could I make it work to where I could still have that sense of joy, that sense of style and beauty and expression, the way that I want to express myself or come across to others, that is still fashionable, that is still beautiful, regardless of how my body has changed. And so I found that in many different ways. Blazers being one. I really love blazers, and you can dress them up, you can dress them down, but they are flattering on our bodies. I talked a lot about ruching and wrap dresses. So those are
Yes.
some of the things, right? So
Yes,
yes.
yes. I love that. I love that you reverted back to an identity of joy
Right.
because I think that as mothers and as we navigate some of the more challenging times, or we try to have everything perfect and make sure every checkbox is checked off, we
Mm,
sometimes lose that joy that
right.
motherhood can bring. And when you are able to just find whatever it is to relive the joy or bring back the joy that makes you who you are. Because
Mm,
another thing is, we can sometimes lose our identity in this motherhood process,
mm,
navigating life with partners and taking care of family and scaling in our 9 to 5s and in our businesses, we could lose ourselves. So finding fashion and being aware and loving your body and knowing what is flattering, it
mhm.
just is so important. It's so important. And of course, you being a creative, it might be a little bit easier for you, but do you have any fashion tips, since we're talking about fashion a little bit? Do you have any fashion tips
Yes.
for moms that may feel like, listen, I don't really have time to dress up or dress myself, or I'm walking my closest thing to fashion is my messy mom bun and these sweats. Like athleisure, like how do you what are some fashion tips that are practical that every everyday mom or any woman can use to help them feel beautiful and confident?
So, something I heard recently that really just stuck with me, and I said I need to implement this more in my creative styles and all of that, is juxtaposition. And it's just the
Okay.
idea
Ooh.
of like mixing things that don't necessarily go together, but make you feel good together. So,
Okay.
like, you might be
Okay.
wearing those sweats, but maybe you feel a little more glammed, a little more put together with a heel, right? So you can
Okay.
wear the sweats with the heel.
Yeah.
You could, wear the sweats with a red bold lip. So just like
Ooh.
having fun, and not really sticking to the rules, but creating your own rules. And let
Mm.
me tell you, Pinterest is my best friend because sometimes I might
Come
have
on,
an
let's talk
idea.
about Pinterest.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. I feel like Pinterest is so underutilized. So let's talk about it. I love that.
Yeah. Well,
Love that.
I use Pinterest even for our shoots, for my birthday shoot. What was funny is that I didn't necessarily have a style, like a look in mind. I had more so colors. Like there were certain
Mm,
colors that I knew I wanted to represent me in this new phase of life. And
yes.
so red being one, and red
Hmm.
is just such a power color.
It
Um,
is.
right?
Hmm.
Or like blush pink was another one that it's very girly and flirty, but also still feminine and sophisticated. It can be
Absolutely.
all those things. And then there was also like a metallic or glitter, type of color. So like, very royal, very pristine, and all of that.
Mm,
So I think it's really just finding the pieces that you like, put them together in however it feels comfortable. And of course, use Pinterest, use social media for those who have maybe a similar body type to that you
sure.
admire. Use that to like push you to dress up and to feel better about yourself, because something I say often is dressing well is a form of self-care. I truly believe that.
Mm.
And so definitely do all the things, try all the things, colors, textures, fabric, like do it all.
I love that. Dressing well is a form of self-care. I'm going to say that one
Yes.
more time. Dressing well is a form of self-care. I do really feel that at times, between the fatigue, between
Mhm.
soccer practice, between board meetings, between having to take care of elderly parents, we really don't feel like doing anything sometimes. But I realize that when I am intentional with dressing up, whether I'm
Mhm.
going to a networking event or I'm meeting up with girlfriends, it is a form of self care and
Right.
an immediate boost of confidence. I always say this, like when I dress up and I put on a little makeup and I put something unique that represents who I was. I always say I feel like myself again, because
Yes.
we can sometimes feel lost in motherhood and all the different roles that we have. We feel like we can lose ourselves at times. So, dressing up, putting on that bold lip, wearing a little shimmer and sequin, which is always my go to, or a little leopard print, definitely
And
does
you
boost
go
my.
there with the colors too. You definitely
Oh,
go there
yeah,
with the colors.
I'm not afraid of color because
Yes.
colors literally can evoke emotion out of you.
Yes.
Colors can be used as therapy. The right colors make you feel happy or calm or confident or sexy. So
Right.
colors are so important. And as moms, what I just want us to encourage moms, mother figures, anyone listening is you're still that girl.
Yes.
You're still that beautiful woman. Yes, you're still
Mhm.
that girl. Sometimes we don't
Mhm.
feel like it, but we
Right.
need to remind ourselves and to remind everyone else sometimes
Yes, I was getting ready to
that
say
we,
that.
yes, that we are that same woman that got us from point A to point
Mhm.
now. We're still her, and she should be celebrated and honored. And building community and making sure women feel safe is imperative. So,
Mhm.
Sabine, now I kind of want to talk a little bit more about the work that you're doing with your foundation. And I want us to deep dive into where that passion started from. We heard a little bit about it, but a
Yes.
little bit more about how that passion continuing to grow and how it
Mhm.
led you to create the foundation that you have now.
Yeah, so actually, I told a little bit about how I started to recognize certain, I want to say patterns in the
Mm,
cases that I was being called to.
mm,
So at one point, there were quite a few like human trafficking cases that were being
mm.
opened in the work area that I was assigned to. And I
Can we talk a
remember,
little bit more about those cases? I'm sorry to interrupt,
yes,
but can
of
we talk
course.
a little bit more about the signs or the patterns, just so if anyone's listening, they
Yes.
can recognize?
Yeah, so first, just to give some background, when we're talking about human trafficking, because oftentimes people want to associate it with what they see on TV. right? And so, the kidnapping, the very
Mm,
dramatic, and that is and can be human trafficking, but that is one form of human trafficking, but it can exist in many different ways. So, first, just to give some,
yeah.
background education, human trafficking is made up of two different categories. So, there's sex trafficking and there's labor trafficking, right? And so, labor, of course, is related to unfair labor practices and long hours. Think of like a sweatshop, right?
Mm,
And then now sex trafficking is going to be what people often will mistake as just loose women or women that are prostituting. Oftentimes these
mm.
women are not doing that on their own, but they are
Oh.
being sent out. And it can exist in different forms. It's not always like the typical, oh, someone on the street. It could be, through an escort company. It can be through so many different avenues. This is all about control. The
Mm.
bottom line, it's about control, right? Money is involved, but control is like key. And so if you see any young people, because it's men and women,
Women.
or young men and young women that can be vulnerable, as well as children that can be vulnerable to human trafficking, you always want to pay attention to how free they are to move and make decisions on their own.
Mm,
Oftentimes you will see someone who has a trafficker or a pimp, however different communities call it different things. They don't have autonomy most of the time. They don't have autonomy. They can't do whatever they want with their money or can make decisions just all on their own. They oftentimes have to check in with someone. That's just one mild example. There's so many others that we could look for, but I would say that is definitely key. And then there's also three different type of traffickers. There is the
mm,
Romeo trafficker, right? And the Romeo is going to be someone who pretends to be a lover, pretends to be your
mm,
boyfriend, and then he traffics you. Then you have like the corporate trafficker. That's going to be someone
mm.
like what I encountered, where, hey, I'm this industry insider and I can help you fulfill your dreams. And it's often a lot of empty promises, a grandiose career in entertainment or what have you. And then there is the guerrilla trafficker. The guerrilla trafficker is the ones that we are most commonly used to, because that's what you see on TV. Those are going to be
The TV.
they're going to be the ones who use more physical force. And so they'll
Mm,
do the kidnapping, maybe beat someone up to force them into whatever it is, whether it's labor or sex trafficking. So those are the three type of traffickers. But there's so much we can speak on this. But
of
when I started being called on those cases, I was a patrol officer, and oftentimes a investigator would be working on the case, and they would call for a patrolman, a patrol officer, to come and transport a victim or
mm,
transport a defendant. And it was in transporting and having to go oftentimes to the interviews where they're interviewing these women. And I would just listen to them and think, oh my goodness, like this reminds me a lot of, and it wouldn't be the same exact situation, but like in terms of the
mhm.
control again. At some point, 10 years into my time in law enforcement, this same man came into the fold and he started making demands and essentially extorting me. And I wasn't about to fulfill those demands. And so I denied him. And what he decided to do is take it up a notch. And with the fact that he exploited me early on, he had footage of me. And so
Wow.
he went to my workplace and exposed it, hoping that I would get fired. And
Wow.
he went to another agency and they did the same thing, looking into him, or at least looking into more details about what he was referring to. And it was in that moment when he, made the complaints against me in my workplace. One of the same investigators who used to work the human trafficking cases was now in internal affairs. He heard this man's wild claims and even what this man showed to them discredit me and make me look like someone with a terrible past and that shouldn't
Right.
be an officer. And he said, you know what? This is a form of human trafficking. When you're being exploited, you often don't see yourself. And remember, there is the Romeo trafficker, there is the corporate trafficker.
Right.
right? So that means
Mm-hmm.
they're never a guerrilla trafficker, you know you're in danger, right? There's typically no doubt that you are a victim in this scenario, but you don't necessarily feel or identify as a victim in the other two cases. And so when this man tells me, this is like a form of human trafficking, you were exploited, is what he said. All the memories from those years
Yeah.
just started like flooding my mind, and I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe
Yeah.
it. And I have to say, there was a lot of shame,
Mm.
that was tied to what had happened so early on. But what I learned from a child who had unresolved trauma is that when bad things happen, you just bury it down
Mm.
and just forget about it and move on. I couldn't see myself as a victim. I wasn't in therapy. Therapy wasn't a thing like that back then.
Right.
But it really took this guy making this complaint. Thankfully, this investigator now being in internal affairs, being able to identify what this was. And he actually had me go to therapy. And he
Wow.
said, you need to speak to a police psychologist to start working some of these things out. And so it was really his insight, having the experience that led me down my healing journey. So,
Wow, Sabine. There's so much more to it. And thank you again for your vulnerability. And for anyone that may be listening, I hope that some of this insight can help you release some of that
mm,
shame because sometimes we're victims and we don't even know in our day to day lives. And now this becomes the basis for the work that you do. And not only are you giving women the tools to have a career, let it be sustainable entertainment, but making it so that they can reclaim their power back, you
amen.
know? So
Yes.
tell me a little bit more about Lights, Camera, Action for Change and what your foundation is doing for women and how are you empowering women um, to stop this cycle?
So what I realized in my own experience is that had I been informed early
Mm,
on, things would have definitely taken a different course, right? And so while I was doing that healing journey, my psychologist at the time saw a episode of TD Jake's talk show. At the time he had a talk show. And so a young
mm,
lady appeared on the talk show, and the psychologist said, I saw this episode and you just have to watch it. This woman has like almost the same story that you have. And she's been able to turn her life around and she's actually helping
mm,
people now. I have to watch this episode. And I did. I was crying, but it was like
mm,
also very healing for me to see that someone who also had pain turned her
mm.
pain into purpose. And
Ooh,
so
yes.
I just needed to reach out to her. And so that very week, I looked up her company name, I found her email online, and I emailed her. And do you know, she responded to me that same week. We ended up getting on the phone and everything. And I just couldn't, I was blown away.
Wow.
And
Amazing.
so I have to give credit to her because she has been so instrumental to my healing journey. Her name is Rachel Thomas, and she is actually the founder of the Sowers Education Group. But she also authored the Ending the Game curriculum that I am a facilitator of.
Yes, yes, we talked about that a little bit. Yeah.
Yes, and it is a nationally recognized curriculum. So she started it out in California, but they're in multiple states now. And in 2020, she had the esteemed pleasure, and she still sits on the advisory committee for the U.S. Human Trafficking Council. So
Wow.
yes.
Amazing. 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 So here's the thing about being in community with women and just
Mm,
being able to be open and vulnerable is that we're not alone.
right.
And sometimes when
Mhm.
we go through traumatic things or we go through things in life that, almost we thought that the plans were going to knock us down and alienate us. And maybe that was the mission for the plan. But
Right.
in truth,
Mm,
we found a space and we found a God sent resource
Right.
that made us feel connected again.
Oh
Because
my
sometimes
goodness.
our traumas disconnect us from the world and disconnect us from the inner truth that our pain doesn't last always, and through those trying times there is purpose and there is legacy and there is impact to be made. So Sabine, oh my gosh, yes, thank you, thank you, thank you for that. And tell us more about the women that you encounter through your organization, and a little bit more about if someone wants to connect to that community, what can they
Mhm.
expect um from Lights Camera Action for Change?
Yes. So first I have to share that we actually launched in 2024. And I started out as a virtual event, thinking that it would be this one off event, right? And so I brought in different professionals within the entertainment industry, mainly local to South Florida. And I even had an entertainment attorney, a labor attorney
Oh,
come in, and they spoke
yes.
and shared their expertise. I had a signed
Mm-hmm.
model. It was so important for me to also have a model because of my own
Yes.
experience. And Kamala Kay, she came and she spoke and
Oh,
shared her
yes.
wisdom.
Uh-huh.
Because this is such a heavy topic, building awareness around this topic, I also integrated entertainment. And so we had a singer and we had a
Mm,
poet,
mm,
share their art. And it was just an amazing time. And then I had the idea, and of course, with feedback from the audience, people were telling me, This needs to be an ongoing thing. Like you cannot just stop at this
mm.
one event." And so I said, okay, you know what? I'll make it an annual event. But then as time
Oh.
progressed, and we had our second annual event in April, and we strategically planned it for April because April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and it is also Child
Mm.
Abuse Prevention Month. And so we had the
Wow.
second annual event in April. This time it was in person, and it was
Mm-hmm.
just as amazing as the first time. And from
Love
there,
that.
I said, let's grow this community and do more than just an annual event. And so, what I kicked off just last month is virtual information sessions on a monthly basis. And
Oh
then
my
we will.
gosh, yes.
Yes. And so the first month, and I will be redoing it again, is the media literacy, is what I
Okay.
held last month. And so, media literacy is so important because a lot of what we believe to be our ambitions or why we go after the things that we go after is because of the media, what we see in the media. And we're fed all of these ideas that we have to have the fancy cars and the flashy clothes. And it's like, do we? Or are we being sold this? Are we being sold that propaganda?
Mm.
So it's so important that, young people and just people in general are aware of how to consume the media, and how to
Mm.
be able to decipher and use critical thinking when they see images and, all type of things portrayed in the media. And so the monthly informational session started last month, and then we're going to have quarterly workshops. And those are going to be fun because that's where the real community building
Mm.
begins, because people will get to network with others who are starting out just as they are. And it's going to be an amazing time. So, for anyone who's interested in connecting, definitely find us on Instagram at lcaforchange.com and LCA for Change on Instagram. And I'm actually starting a newsletter that's going to
Love that.
start. Yes, it's going to start next week. And so I can't wait to share, all the tips and resources that are going to be within this newsletter. So definitely stay tuned to the website, join our mailing list so you'll be the first to receive it.
I love that. I love that. And you said something that was so impactful, which is being aware of what we consume. Because the media, now that we have so much access to media, it's on our phones, our iPads, our computers, we can stream wherever we go. The media can impact who
Mm,
we are
mm,
because it's all about storytelling, and not every
mhm.
story may be telling the truth, but it's presented in such a way that
Right.
makes life to be the
You
perfect
know,
B-roll.
so something I wanted to tie into motherhood as well is that it's also what fuels my work because entertainment hopefuls, aspiring entertainers, creatives, yes, they could be 18 and up like I was, but we also know that there's many parents who are interested in starting careers in entertainment for their children. And so they definitely want to
Mm.
be aware as well. I spoke to a parent recently and she said, I have 3 children and my oldest, who's 19, wants to pursue modeling. And I am terrified for her because I hear the stories and I don't want to block her from her dream, but I want to ensure that she's safe. So she said, I'm so happy that you are creating, and building this platform.
Mm.
And, she was like, it's so very needed right now. And so that was so reassuring because, oftentimes we do our work, the things that we're passionate about, and we're not sure how it can impact others. And so it was very good to hear that, and it pushes me to continue on this mission.
Yes, you are definitely a mission-driven founder. I love the fact that, the work that you are doing is not just for this generation, but for the next generation that is to come. And I realize as mothers, everything we do, whether we realize it or not, creates some type of generational impact for our children and the
Mhm.
next to come and the next to come. And one more question before we get into one of my favorite parts of the show is
Okay.
how do you balance doing the work that you're doing, advancing in your career as an analyst, and be a mom? Because I think a lot of us have so much difficulty with trying to find harmony because people don't want to say work-life balance anymore. They call it work-life harmony. How are you
Harmony.
finding some harmony in doing all these different things while being present with your family, your children, your spouse here, and all the other members and your loved ones? So
Whew. I
inquiring
thank
minds want
God.
to know.
I thank God for my village, and that village includes my
Mm,
parents, and of course, it includes my husband. Right now, my husband is
hmm.
holding it down with the kids so that I could even do this interview.
Same.
I'm just very grateful for him and for our loved ones who support us in so many different ways. But also, and another thing from my husband that I don't always appreciate in the moment is that he keeps me balanced, because when he sees that I am doing a little too much, putting a little too much on my plate, he reeled me back in.
Yes.
And it's needed. It is needed because,
Mm,
especially for the two of us, we are God-fearing women. We believe in God, and God tells us in the word that we must rest. And so while we have
yes.
all these different things that we want to achieve, even that creativity, it doesn't come from being exhausted. It comes from a rested mind, a rested soul.
Oh,
So we
yes.
have to take that time, for our families, but even time for ourselves.
Yes. I'm gonna clap it up. Yes, 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 yes to rest. Okay.
Yes to
Because
rest.
I
I'm
realize
gonna
that
make that a
yes to
t-shirt.
rest. Let's put it on a t-shirt, a mug, a hat, or something, because we need to be reminded that
Yeah.
rest is important. And if we
Mhm.
really want to go there and get into the word and everything, even God rested
Yes.
after he created the earth, the heaven and the earth and all the things thereof. He rested. We need
Mhm.
to rest. And I think as ambitious women that are used to just going and going and going, you know,
Mhm.
the next goal, the next goal, the next goal, achieving this, building this, coming up with the next plan and the next platform,
Mhm.
rest becomes something that we neglect. And it doesn't need
Mhm.
to be neglected. Rest is imperative for us to live in the genius that we are given,
Mhm.
the gifts and talents that we are given. Rest allows that to be reset. Rest allows that to be refined and allows that to really grow in the way that it should. So, yes to rest. Okay,
Mhm.
Sabine, we're having such a great conversation, but I don't want to hold you up any longer. But let's get to a fun part of the show, which is our millennial nostalgia break. Okay. I believe that being a part of this generation where we are the 80s babies has impacted who we are today as
Mhm.
moms. I think we're really fun. I think that we can see both sides to the coin because
Yeah.
we have our our parents that were the baby boomers, and then
Mhm.
we're in the middle of the Gen Zers. So
Right. We're
we have a really
sandwiched in
unique
between.
sandwich. We're the sandwich generation, so we have a unique perspective. But let's talk about some fun millennial memories, whether that's
Yeah.
fashion, boy
Uh-huh.
bands. What do you remember from the early 2000s that, really brings you a little bit of joy?
The early thousands. I mean, Destiny's Child was everywhere and had so much
Okay.
to do with, I remember the writings on the wall. I remember that
Mm,
album and just like playing it from
yeah.
front to back. There's still songs on there that I sing, not even the ones
On
that made it
repeat.
to the radio. Right. There's still songs, so
Mm,
that was amazing. Of course, early 2000s, we cannot forget, Lauryn Hill. Like, oh my goodness. Well, she was a little bit
hmm.
earlier, but, she was still amongst that era.
For sure.
But yeah. And, I have to say,
So music
actually,
was important to you.
oh yeah, music was definitely important.
Yeah. I love that. We had really good music back then. I don't know,
Yes.
like it just seemed to be a simpler time. It seemed to be a time where, I don't know, the cares of the world were a little bit different and we just enjoyed things more and we were
Mhm.
carefree. Now we have bills and taxes and whatnot and children. So
Yes.
here we are. But yes, the 2000s, I mean, we had a time. This is a point where we come to the show where we're about to wrap up and we have a chance to reflect a little bit more about who we were before and where we are now in our motherhood journey. So, if you had an opportunity to tell yourself when you were in the early motherhood trenches something about who you are now, what would you tell?
Right as you said that song, that song, it would all work out.
Mm,
It would all work out. Like that,
yeah.
that just hit me. That just literally hit me right
Uh,
now. Oh my goodness, because you can so easily get overwhelmed.
mhm.
But for sure, something that definitely helped me, and I shout them out as much as I can, is community, right? And, Black Mom Miami is one of those communities for
Yes,
me. So
yes.
for sure, community, I would definitely tell my early mom stage that yes, it will all work out.
Yes, it will. If you're listening now and you're in the newborn trenches, or if you're in a process, whether it's a fertility journey or an adoption journey, just know that it all works out. Is it tough? Does it feel sometimes even ghetto? Yes, it does.
It definitely is.
But it does work out day to day, moment by moment. Sabine, this has been a needed and impactful conversation. We got deep into some things that we don't always talk about, but what we're realizing as society evolves is that we are becoming more brave to talk about
Mhm.
those uncomfortable topics
Right.
because the survival of
It's
women and
dependent.
children
It's dependent
are
on.
are dependent on it.
Right.
So thank you again for bringing your passion, your purpose, your advocacy and bringing and shedding some light on something that may make people uncomfortable, but we have to be uncomfortable when it comes to the lives of women and children that are vulnerable. So thank you so much for your wisdom. Thank you for your service, okay?
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine being in law enforcement, how that can just be a lot. So thank you for your service and thank you for now bringing all that insight, intellect,
Mhm.
and wisdom to set the tone for generations to come. So I just want to give you your flowers and let you know
Thank
that that
you.
is just so inspirational. And I'm sure our listeners are going to be inspired and empowered in such a good way. So you mentioned it before. Let's mention it one more time. Where can listeners connect with you?
Thank you so much because I was about to add that myself. So, if you want to follow me in my own journey, it's Sabine Dieme on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, all of the things. And
Yes.
for the movement, for the platform, at LCA4FOR change on Instagram and the website www.lca4change.com. On that same website, there is a link when you scroll to the bottom. You can fill out a questionnaire because right now we are in development of our very own curriculum. That is the Trauma Informed Career Readiness Curriculum.
Love
And what we
that.
would love to do is pilot that curriculum with aspiring creatives. And so if
Mm,
you are interested in being the early curriculum students, I would say,
mhm.
then definitely sign up. We would love to have you pilot the program so that we can, share it later on to the masses. And so, yes, lca4change.com.
Love that. Sabine, thank you again for your vulnerability, your strength, your audacity, and everything that you're doing for women and children and the impact you're making in your own children's lives with all the sacrifices you are making to build legacy for them. As always, thank you for tuning into Musings of a Geriatric Mama. Don't forget to subscribe, share, like, all the things. Share this with another mama or mother figure that needs some encouragement. And join me next time for another powerful conversation. Thank you and take care. Bye.